Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Ksenia Kalar, guest hosting for Evan Dawson. If you are a young professional searching for a job right now, you've probably heard it all. The job market is great, companies are hiring. You just need to network more. Entry-level jobs require 3-5 years of experience. That's just how it is. And yet, many young people are struggling to land jobs, even those with degrees, internships, and solid resumes. Some applicants report applying to hundreds of positions, getting ghosted by recruiters, or making it to the final interview only to lose out to someone with more experience. Some are settling for lower-paying jobs outside their field, while others are giving up on their job search altogether. If the economy is supposedly doing well, why are so many young professionals stuck? The data backs it up. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the unemployment rate for recent graduates increased to 5.3% in the third quarter of 2024, and nearly half of all Gen Z workers are considering leaving their jobs because they feel undervalued. Employers say they're desperate for talent, but young job seekers say they're just not being given a chance. So what's really going on? Are young people too picky, too inexperienced, or too impatient? Or are employers raising the bar too high, offering too little pay and ignoring fresh talent? Today, we're digging into the challenges young professionals face in today's job market. What's broken, what can be fixed, and how job seekers can actually land opportunities. Joining me today are three experts. Kevin Rustisi, Vice President and COO of Boulder Industrial Contractors. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Brian Carroll, owner at Lane Recruiting. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
Justin Lewins, a tech entrepreneur and MBA career consultant. Thanks for joining, Justin.
Happy to be here.
You can join the conversation this hour by calling 844-295-8255, or if you're in Rochester, 585-263-9994. You can also email the program at connections@wxxi.org. And you can watch us on the WXXI News YouTube channel, where you can also leave comments in the chat. Brian, I have a first question to you.
Okay.
So what's happening behind the scenes of hiring? Are companies really overwhelmed with applications, or are there fewer qualified candidates than we think?
Yes, I think, well, I guess that the landscape has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. So I do think that, there are a lot of job seekers out there. 2 years ago, I think I would have called it more of what's called an employee market, meaning there's a lot more jobs than employees or job seekers out there looking for a new position. That has completely flipped in the last 2 years. Right now, we are in the middle of what I would call an employer market, meaning there's more people on the market actively seeking a new position than there are jobs for them. When that happens, I do think you'll tend to see employers shift to, we can call it picky, and I think that's a fair word to use because they know that there are large applicant pools with a lot of talented individuals that are out of work, let alone those that are working, but certainly open to hearing about new opportunities. So that gives employers a bit of an advantage to be a little bit more picky. Now, is that always the right approach? I think it depends heavily on the position that they're recruiting for and the challenges that role needs to tackle. But that's a very individual situation. But overall, I think that's what candidates right now are facing is a market packed with people that are very talented and actively seeking new roles. And most roles they come up against are going to be highly competitive. And if they're doing the same things that the rest of that marketplace is doing, that talent pool is doing, they're going to blend in with everybody else that's applying and kind of going through the motions, hitting the easy apply button on LinkedIn and hoping for the best, as opposed to getting a bit more creative or a lot more creative and trying to find different ways to get directly in front of hiring managers and kind of show the grit and passion and not just go through the motions when looking for a new role. So I think it's a challenge for job seekers, but those that are tackling the challenge and not giving into it are the ones that are seeing more productivity from their job search.
Justin, you work with MBAs and young professionals. What's the biggest frustration you hear from job seekers today?
Right. Yeah, a lot of different things happening in this job market today, but one of the things that is most frustrating, of course, to candidates, whether they're domestic students or international, is being able to, again, get in front of people. Of course, there's a typical way that you can reach out via LinkedIn. Sometimes those messages can be short or extremely lengthy, or there are certain things that you can do, of course, when it comes to corporate receptions or conferences. But, overall, the frustration comes in where it's not necessarily identifying the right person to connect with. And then beyond that, making sure that once they have that call set up or that connection and anticipating it, knowing exactly what it is that they want to talk about. Right. So there's different things that I know I've curated over the past, I would say 6 months to a year. That's really based on my 10, 15 plus year career, and really been able to put together a lot of best practices related to networking, and then really being able to find different ways to have an extremely intriguing and engaging conversation, generating key insights, which is basically what you're paid for in the job market, key insights, and then displaying your ability to execute at the end of the day. So that frustration, again, it lies in the networking piece and then the communication. But, obviously in time in business school, being able to coach, mentor, and teach a lot of the students so that when they do have these conversations, they can move to really positive outcomes, whether that's short-term referral, medium-term, where they can, be invited to reach back out, or longer-term mentorship that they can receive.
Brian, coming back to what Justin just said, how much of hiring is actually about skills and experience versus connections and knowing the right people?
I think they're both part of what I would include in a cohesive strategic plan when it comes to a job search. The way I look at it is the networking component is an absolutely vital piece as you're looking for a new position. You got to have people out there that know what you're looking for and can be extra eyes out there. The other components that I look at, I think, the job boards are kind of a necessary evil. I think people are frustrated with those because there's a lot of time and effort spent in them with little return. But I also think because people are stopping at the apply button and not doing anything proactive beyond that. And that's what 98% of people are doing. And 98% of people are probably getting about the same results. So being creative and what I would call proactive and kind of a third step in that job seeking strategy. So the networking, the job boards, knowing who's hiring, but there's also the proactive piece of, really creating a target list of companies, regardless of if they have a job open right now or not. But these are companies that have a need for your skill set. They're a company you could see yourself working with, and proactively getting yourself in front of those organizations. My talent acquisition friends aren't going to like to hear this, but I don't always recommend applying to a job as a first step. And in fact, a lot of times I would say don't even bother. I think a lot of candidates will say, every job I see has 100 plus applicants on it or 1,000 plus. What's the point? And I agree. What is the point? If you're going to be the 1,000th and first, you're probably not going to get seen. So then why not try something different and more proactive? And that's where I recommend direct connections. And Justin just talked about, how do we find that right person? It takes time. It's not easy. It's not simple as an easy apply button. It's going to take some investment on the candidate's part to get better results on the back end. So I recommend using LinkedIn as your best friend there. Try to find the 1, 2, or 3 people who could be that direct hiring manager for a role. And instead of being applicant 268, go directly to that hiring manager and even email them and say, look, I found this role. I'm extremely interested. My resume is attached. Here's a little bit about me and why I think I'm a great fit, and go directly. And I don't say that to disrespect the talent acquisition processes. There are a lot of companies that do a great job and actually do provide feedback, but there's a lot of companies who don't. And if it's the difference of you getting a job or not, and maybe you get a little slap on the wrist for going around talent acquisition, there are times where that's the right move when people are desperately seeking their next role.
Thank you. Kevin, have you noticed a shift in how young professionals approach jobs today compared to, let's say, 10 years ago?
No, because I had a lot of same frustrations that I've heard that you shared, like entry level positions requiring 2 to 3 years experience. I remember when I was coming out of college, that quagmire of a situation was still the same, and I never could make sense of it. Like, it's an entry level job. How do I get 2 to 3 years experience? It seemed like it was a way to filter us out, I guess. So you can either let that be something that holds you back, right, and becomes a convenient excuse that you can use. But I love the ideas that Justin and Brian have kind of set forth is how do you differentiate yourself within a crowded market? And I think now more than ever, we see the importance of soft skills. Soft skills are the things that you can't learn in school, right? Like time management, showing up on time, right? Doing what you say you were going to do, have high integrity, take pride in the work that you're doing. You're not going to learn that in a classroom. So those are the things that, as an employer, that we're traditionally looking for, because those hard skills can be trained. And thanks to the advancements of technology, right, we're all talking about AI, and if you're not using ChatGPT now, you probably will be at some point. But that's going to disrupt the job market even more. So some of the jobs that we've relied on and have had a focus on will be a thing of the past. I think we've already seen some of those mass layoffs in some of those industries. I mean, I was a consultant for a very long time, and you see the big five starting to talk about, well, they're just data aggregators and they're just taking quantitative and qualitative data down into simplistic, understandable, bite-sized chunks. Why do we need them anymore? So, and you're kind of seeing this within business. Businesses are evolving, trying to get their arms around human capital. We saw them spending a lot of money, to Brian's earlier point, during the pandemic. So they would spend to get talent in the door, and then they realized very quickly 3 years later they overspent. Now we spent too much. So I would say the market will continuously evolve and continuously adapt, and the skills that you'll need in order to be successful will also continuously change. But if you're evolving and adapting to the emerging needs of the market while differentiating yourself, I think you're in for success in the long run. So. I love Charles Darwin because he taught us a lot of things, that evolution is the key to society. And I think that's what we're really seeing today, is that those soft skills are probably most important. So that's really what we look for as an employer at Bolter. And that's where we see a lot of potential back into the skilled trades, because that's something that AI simply cannot replace.
Justin, there is a perception that Gen Z and younger workers don't want to work as hard or don't have the same work ethic as past generations. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I know that there's a lot of research articles that have been coming out to say a lot of employers have been quick to hire, then also quick to quote unquote fire Gen Z workers. It's an interesting point just because there's a shift in dynamics when it comes to the thought process, when it comes to the use of technology and how we're able to actually utilize it in order to be productive. So I think that therein lies the shift between, let's just say, baby boomer generation, of course, millennials, of course, I fall into that bucket, and then the usage of technology being akin to each of the industrial revolutions, of course, that we've seen over decades, of course. That same shift is inspiring this new generation to think much differently. And I think that is where that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. So there's a lot of friction between how older generations of workers are thinking about solving problems and also being productive in order to impact the bottom line, versus the new generation, Gen Z, thinking about how best to be as productive as possible, but also making sure that they keep in tune with what matters to them. Right? Those shifts and those dynamics have changed significantly. So what matters to Gen Z? Of course, doing a great job, but also protecting their peace, having what they call, of course, work-life balance or work-life integration. Those things are extremely important. I think it is stemming from our time frame that we endured throughout the pandemic. So I've definitely witnessed to that because there was a lot of things that had to be done, of course, in that time frame. And what was sacrificed on the back end was, whether it was not eating right, not working out, not being able to have a degree of a social life, and they want to make sure that they hold on dearly to those things, which matter. Right? So I think that's why there's a bit of a shift. I think it's a bit of an unfair statement to call to put the negative cast over Gen Z, but there's ultimately a meeting of the minds and basically an intersection that we need to get to make sure we prioritize what's important to each of the generations of folks that are in the workforce today.
I'm Ksenia Kalar, sitting in for Evan Dawson, and today on Connections, we're talking about finding jobs as young adults. I'm joined in the studio by Kevin Rustasi, Vice President and CEO of Bolter Industrial Contractors, Brian Carroll, owner at Lean Recruiting, and Justin Lewis, a tech entrepreneur and MBA career consultant. We got an email from Nick, who is wondering what sectors of the job market are saturated and which are struggling to find people. Brian, is that something that you could address?
Sure. And I think, again, this goes back to Kevin mentioned the evolution of the job market. I think that has evolved a lot in the past couple of years. If you asked me this question maybe 2 years ago, I would say that the hottest areas are anywhere around software engineering, software engineers themselves, cloud engineers, what else? Product managers, data engineering. Not that those aren't still highly desirable skill sets. There just aren't as many jobs open for those roles right now. And I think what you're seeing is companies, I'll take software engineering as a great example. I think what you're seeing is there's been a lot of layoffs in technology over the last 2 years. And I think many of who you're seeing being laid off are what I would tend to call generalists. So historically, you'd see software developers either focus front end or back end. And now we have what's called full stack engineers, which is both sides of that equation. Less specialization. Okay. I wouldn't actually, that might be a bad way to put it. But they're not as specialized in front end or back end and very deep in one specific area. And I think those are the people that companies have tended to hang on to, are the deeply specialized talent that they have, and the more generalist folks that they hired them for those roles have now said, okay, we don't really have that need. Let's scale back there. And those are a lot of who I see on the market right now. So as far as what's saturated, I don't think there's necessarily, a lot of fields are saturated right now because there's a lot of quality candidates on the open market right now. So I think there isn't one or two I can name. There's a lot of fields. Software engineering is certainly one of them where it's highly, highly saturated. Areas that are not highly saturated get more specialized. So I'll dig in further into software engineering. If we're talking a software architect, somebody that's very high level, very specialized, those are fewer and far between. So I think the higher up you go and the more specialized you go, you're obviously going to fare a little bit better than say a generalist right now, because there are a lot of them on the open market.
Thank you, Brian. Kevin, you touched base a little bit on soft skills, which I agree are super important. What do you think, what are some common soft skills that younger candidates seem to be missing?
Ooh. It kind of touches on, I think, the belief that this immediacy economy, right? So if I can order something and it comes to my house within minutes or days, right? So I think the idea that I can take information and it immediately makes it knowledge, which then I can sell to somebody else as wisdom. I see a lot of that with the younger generation, right? Just because I can read it online doesn't mean I know it, and doesn't mean at all how I know how to apply it. So I think problem solving is one of the challenges that some people face. So if it's not an ideal situation with perfect elements, that they get confused, if it's like this utopian state that I was promised, it's dealing with adversity. I think time management, not to keep bringing that up, but who can't work on time management? We're trying to do everything all at once, and we now wear busy as this valor of honor. If anybody that's not busy, you start looking at them a little weird. Like, why do you got so much time? So I think a lot of those things are some of the economics that we see within society that bleed over into our professional lives. Curiosity is one of those other things that I think asking our elders questions instead of believing that we can find everything online is a great way to gain wisdom. I just don't see those types of open-ended questions being asked enough. I think we go in with I know it all or I can figure it out attitude, and I don't really need somebody else. We have people even at Bolter, for example. We do rigging, and it's a very specialized field. It takes 2 years to gain that skill to be proficient in it. And they would tell somebody that's been doing this for 30 years how to do it, or that's not right, and that creates a lot of friction unnecessarily, and resentment, and resentment builds, and then you're not really bestowing that wisdom on the younger generation. And I loved your question earlier, right? Are they lazier? And I think that's a total lack of understanding. Right. How they're motivated is totally different than how the previous generations have been motivated. And we're leaning more in our culture on love rather than fear. Fear used to be the way to motivate intrinsically more than in the past. And extrinsic motivation is short term. It's short lived. I'll do what you want me to do for a very short period of time. And I remember your bonus only for about less than 30 days. So, absolutely. I think some of the soft skills that need to be accentuated within that hiring process, we want to sell our technical skills, and I get that. But selling your understanding of how you learn is probably more valuable, because if you have a good idea and understanding as to how you learn, then an organization can stop with their one-size-fits-all or one-size-fits-all approach to development. And then you give them a better idea as to how they can teach you new skills, because that's going to be continuously needed.
In preparation for this program, I scrolled through a lot of jobs and most of them have a requirement of ability to utilize ChatGPT and Gemini, which I think is a very weird way to phrase it for like a job that requires a year or two of experience of like, how do you think these people are getting degrees if they're not able to utilize it? But Justin, I was wondering, how do you see AI and automation changing what skills young professionals need to focus on outside of just being able to utilize AI tools?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking me this question, because the startup that I'm building right now is primarily focused on AI automation, the forward-looking vision toward quantum computing. So, these are game-changing advanced technologies that are sweeping. They have been around for quite some time. If we think back to the days of the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, Alan Turing, one of the individuals that were at the very center of developing the advanced technologies that we're seeing come alive today and being thoroughly utilized. It's something that people have to get comfortable with. And I know there are statistics, figures that have been coming out to say AI is taking jobs away to the tune of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of jobs, which to some degree, there's a little bit of truth there. But in the same way, when we think about when there were horse and carriage, individuals that actually led those horses, worked on those carriages and whatnot, when, of course, Henry Ford came along, those individuals, probably you could think of them as changing toward auto mechanics as opposed to a mechanic for a carriage or a horse carriage. So the same thing is happening right before our eyes. So to be able to take hold of this landscape that is actively evolving every 2 months, 6 months, every year, most definitely, people have to become comfortable with the tools and resources that are out there. If it's leaning into simple resources, YouTube, or like the MS in AI degree at University of Rochester or other degree programs that are out there, great. But the biggest thing that is also important is the experiential learning component. So it's no use me just reading about AI automation, how it can simplify, optimize workflows, enhance productivity. It's no use me reading about it and not being able to execute on it, build in certain projects, maybe even, for example, work through Simon Business School. They have what's known as Simon Vision Consulting, where they are able to serve local area nonprofits and commercial businesses and helping them move their businesses forward. And then, of course, they can put these things on the resume. So same concept, via utilizing AI and automation, being able to execute and build an experiential learning project. So by the time you see that job requirement responsibility, say comfort with ChatGPT or Gemini, leveraging these types of resources and tools, you can have certain star stories, of course, situation, task, action, result, and then go beyond to make sure that you can communicate how what you've done is relevant for their organization, both now and in the future. So that's just my opinion on what's happening now in the AI automation space. People have to be comfortable, have to build in experiences, and of course have to be able to communicate the value add.
Thank you so much, Justin. And we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll have more with our guests, Kevin Rustisi, Vice President and CEO of Bolter Industrial Contractors, and Brian Carroll, owner at Lane Recruiting, and Justin Lewis, a tech entrepreneur and MBA career consultant.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, providing education and life skills solutions designed to empower individuals and the families of those with complex disabilities. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More at marycariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Ksenia Kalar, sitting in for Evan Dawson, and we're talking about getting jobs as recent grads. You can join the conversation this hour by calling 844-295-8255, or if you're in Rochester, 585-263-9994. You can also email the program at connections@wxxi.org, and you can watch us on the WXXI News YouTube channel, where you can also leave comments in the chat. So the next segment, which I'm very excited about, is actually what's wrong with hiring process. So Brian, question to you. I hear a lot of stories from my classmates about job seekers going through 5 rounds of interviews and then getting ghosted. Are companies overdoing it with hiring processes?
You certainly can be, yes. I think that's, again, company to company. In overdoing it, I think depends on probably the person's perspective. Some people are upset that I talk to when they have to go to a third and final interview, which I don't think is crazy. If we're getting out to 5 or 6 interviews, there's some problems here, particularly for entry-level talent. It should coincide with the type of role you're hiring for. The more advanced role, if you're hiring a chief-level officer, you probably need to have an in-depth hiring process with 4 or 5 stages where they're meeting a good chunk of people that they're going to have enterprise-wide impact, and it's important that they're thoroughly vetted. For more entry-level roles, that's absolutely overkill. I also think the problems come with what companies are vetting and how they go about vetting talent. I think that's many companies really struggle with that. And I believe that's because many of the people involved in those vetting processes and the talent assessment processes really shouldn't be a part of it. They're, hey, let's get this person's opinion on so-and-so candidate. And, when I was hiring for my teams, everybody that was a part of the hiring process was there for a specific purpose. They were in those interviews to elicit responses or to assess certain parts of what we were looking for in an individual. If somebody didn't have a purpose, they weren't involved in the conversation. It wasn't, let's get every single person's approval and try to get consensus. Consensus is a killer when it comes to hiring. That's basically when I see that. It's because nobody really wants their ball in the hand at the end of the game, so to speak, and have it be their fault if the person didn't work out. Hiring is very difficult. It's an art, not a science. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make that decision, and consensus, in my opinion, is not the way to go about that. And I often see that. Also, we talked about this before, companies that only want to discuss skills, and that those are hard skills. It's easy to talk about Java programming. You either have that or you don't. Or if you want to get into any specific skill, it's easy to ascertain that and to what level you have that. It's very difficult, on the other hand, to ascertain, Kevin earlier was talking about adaptability. Somebody that's adaptable to changing environments. Those are harder questions to ask, and it's harder to design questions to get the responses that you need. So most interviewers will just stay away from even trying to get an idea of how adaptable is this person, how much of a positive attitude do they have. Some of those soft skills that we just talked about, it's much harder to analyze that from the talent acquisition side of the table. So I think companies need to do a much better job of realizing that at the end of the day, we hire human beings, not resumes and not skill sets. Kevin mentioned earlier, if you're 80% of the way there technically from a technical skill standpoint, but you're a dead-on match from a human skills standpoint, those are the people that I aggressively want to go after. And candidates need to realize too, this is a key piece, that go in knowing that the person across the table from you might be pretty bad at interviewing. Mm-hmm. So you might have to take a little bit of control and make sure some of your great personality traits, your adaptability, your positive attitude, your passionate learning, that comes across whether or not it's directly asked or not. And that's something that a really well-prepared candidate is able to do, whereas somebody who's not prepared and hopes they get asked the right questions is probably not going to do as well.
So do you think the traditional hiring process is outdated and the companies should be rethinking how they evaluate candidates?
I think we are. I think that's been going on for quite a while. I don't know that we've necessarily hit the mark. Again, it's a very general topic. So to loop all companies into, we're all struggling with this, there are certainly companies that do a much, much better job evaluating talent in an efficient process than others. And that's because of some of the things that we just talked about. I think when companies treat it as a transaction, treating interview and talent acquisition as a transaction, like we got a person, we hire them, we move on. It's not really what it is. It's a process that's never ending. Consistently learning more about where things went well, where they didn't, and we just talked about adaptability, adapting and improving so that the next time you're a little bit better at it. So I don't know that we're ever going to fix hiring, so to speak. It's very difficult. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I struggle with it. And I practice this stuff. I do think I'm an adaptable individual, and I get it wrong too. But I think people need to stop looking at it through the lens of right and wrong, and looking at it more through the lens of, are we getting better? Are we evolving? And is each interaction better than the last?
Justin, what do you think? Is there something that should be reevaluated in the hiring process?
I am most definitely in favor of making sure that there's reevaluation, checks and balances along the way. Of course, when there's something that's been done repeatedly over the last 5 years, 10 years, we're just doing it because that's always the way that it's been done. Of course, we inherently run into issues. I can think to two experiences. One is through my basically recruiting journey as an intern when I was for internship when I was an MBA at Simon Business School, and so I basically deployed a guerrilla tactic method strategy to make sure that I could network with the right person, and then of course maintain contact with that person. And when I went to an MBA Veterans Conference in Chicago, made sure to show up, ask the right questions, be attentive, of course engaging, and really deploy the ways that I already practiced in order to stand out early. And guess what? I was invited to a first round the very next day. And this was without having consulting, human capital, HR strategy background anywhere on my resume. And now we're talking to a Big Four organization that had a role based in New York City, one of the toughest offices to get into. Ultimately went toward offer stage and was successful and whatnot. And I think about that recruiting journey, communication all along the way, the individuals that I connected with, similar to the points that my colleagues on the call today have mentioned. It's a more of a process that is less transactional and learning deeply about who this person is, how they show up, how they lead, even without the title. And the second experience I can think about is a colleague of mine. He's extremely successful lawyer, coming out of the Philadelphia area, working out of New York, and then also Washington, D.C., and a lot of high-profile cases he's done. And when he described the process for recruiting, it was mind-boggling because the process that I'm very familiar with, the 3 to 4 rounds, presentations, case interviews, recruiting events, conferences, all these things, I would assume around at least 8, let's just say 6 to 10 touch points with one particular company. It pales in comparison to what his process was when he was going for one of the major, basically one of the most successful law firms in the world. He had mentioned it was no more than 3 rounds. And the long hours of doing presentations, he didn't have to do any of that, right? So I'm talking about Harvard law grad going into the top law firm in the world. Didn't have to do a lot of the things that I was very familiar with, and even train and prep MBAs in present day to be successful at, which requires 6 to 10 touch points with some of these firms, depending on who the firm is. So there's definitely a point at which all of this needs to change, just because the volume of people that are currently in the job market, especially in the landscape of things that are happening in DC, especially a lot of the federal contractors and workers being laid off. There's a point at which there's going to be a overwhelming amount of frustration in the job market. And then, of course, there's a lot of work that will ultimately need to get done on the corporate side, right? So there has to be change. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Justin. Kevin, what's the most frustrating part of trying to fill position right now?
I think we touched on it. I think we're talking about hiring practices. That's an outdated science that was never scientific to begin with. I think that resumes have always been able to be gamed, right? And now you have AI that can take a job description and write the perfect resume to match that job description. So you get a lot of untested skills if you have an over-reliance on a resume. A resume, just like any outfit that you can dress, you can paint a pig, right? So, and for lack of a better phrase, it's just that you can be whatever you want to be on a piece of paper. So if you have this over-reliance of judging somebody by a piece of paper, you miss out on all those abilities to actually understand who that individual is. Until, to Brian's point, until you can ask some of these questions. I've been in sales a long time. I think sales has taught me a lot of things, but it tells you to understand what's in it for the other person other than yourself. It allows you to take this bi-directional approach where you also understand what's in it for you and what's in it for them. So what's most frustrating is somebody coming in and not really knowing themselves, where they're answering yes and no questions, where you're asking an open-ended question and they can't really share too much. I think back to what you guys were discussing earlier, one of the things that I just wanted to mention is that ATS systems and resumes, they're again, the whole idea was that I had so many people that I needed ways to wean them out, just like a lot of the college rates, right? For jobs that probably don't need college experience would require college experience just to wean people out. So we've seen this evolution and this adaptation within the job market too, is that do we actually need those pre-requirements? Like, was that really scientific? And I think the gentleman Justin was just saying before is this hiring process even effective at what it's actually trying to do? And how often do we look at it like a transaction, like Brian said, but never review our credit card statement? Right? We never go back to say, hey, was that question actually helpful or hurtful? Or did we hire the right person when we looked at these 10 or these 20 or these 30? And I think a lot of that analysis can help you to improve upon your hiring process. But I think Brian also made a critical point too, is that we're shopping for right now consensus instead of confrontation. Having disagreement is okay as long as we can talk through it. But nobody wanting to hold the ball or take the ball at the end of the game and take that last shot, you're not really always going to find the best people. So a long-winded way to answer your question, but I think that the way that we interview has not changed to how fast the interviewers are adapting to the environment.
I am very glad all of you brought up this transactional nature of hiring process because it's transactional not only on the side of the company or person who is hiring, but also of the applicant as well. That was one of the questions my friends from school asked me to address. So when we started our program at Simon Business School, we were taught like two different ways of approaching like finding a new job, which is applying for thousands of them or having a list and targeting specific companies. And most of my classmates are utilizing both of these approaches because a lot of them want to work for Anthropic or OpenAI, but all of them understand that not all of them are going to get those jobs and very high chance that none of them will. But at the same time, they see these gigantic applications with submitting your resume, cover letter, then retyping your resume and cover letter, then retyping all your educational experience, then answering like 10 more questions about the company. How to find time, being like a full-time student or a full-time employee or both, and how to find motivation to be able to dedicate like big amount of your time and your character to a certain company.
So I'll jump in there. I think one, I'll just say that LinkedIn with the easy apply button has created more of a problem than they have a solution. It's entirely too easy to just carpet bomb employers for roles that candidates are wholly unqualified to apply for, and that's a tough part on my side of the table because I've got to sift through all that. And it can tend to make you jaded over the entire candidate pool when 99% of 500 applicants had no business applying for the role. And it can even hurt the qualified candidates in the pool. So that's a tough part there. That is truly transactional in nature. The applicant's not doing any homework to understand, is this even the right position for me? And I think it kind of comes back to the difference of being busy and being productive. I see a lot of posts on LinkedIn saying, 4,000 applications and, only 2 interviews. If you put in those 4,000 applications a total of 4,000 seconds into actually applying to those, then you shouldn't get interviews from a lot of those. You're probably unqualified and you really aren't even really trying. You're being busy, but you're not being productive. Productive in a job search to me means you're taking it upon yourself to do some of the homework and some of the legwork so that when you're applying, that person seeing your resume should know exactly why you are in their inbox. It should be immediately clear why you've applied for that role. And I'll go back to some of the things that I mentioned earlier. Application is only one way to go after securing a new position. And in my opinion, it's not even the best. I don't want to tick off my talent acquisition friends by saying go around their processes, but many of those processes are broken. I definitely recommend people respect talent acquisition processes, but if you're waiting 5 or 7 days and you've given a realistic time frame for that company to get back and you're not hearing anything, take control. You already have very little control in the process to begin with. Take control, do some homework, go directly to a hiring manager, but do some homework on the organization first. Find out what their core values are. Find out what type of person fits in that organization. And when you reach out directly, make sure that your message touches on those. You can weave in parts of your own values that coincide with that company. Going to that level, it's much more time consuming, but it's much more productive. It's not just busy work of smashing an easy apply button. It's productive. It's going to take more time, but the results are going to be much, much greater. So when I see people posting those huge numbers, I want to have sympathy for them, but having seen so many bad applicants come through, I have a hard time.
Justin, what do you think about it?
Yeah, happy to add here. And I think it's a really great point that we'll just mention, just because when you're having these conversations, again, like we're thinking about ways, of course, to have an advantage in this present day job market. Ways to, of course, advance, move forward, and then also ways to make sure that you can rise to the top as the top job applicant. Right? So when I think about all the different ways that I've experienced recruiting and also some of the workshops that I've hosted over these last few months at Simon, there's typically about 4 to 5 different components of networking that I talk about, which is overall a winning mindset. So having that power versus pressure dynamic oh, I need to get a job, I need to do well in this, versus I've been invited to this interview. I've also accepted. I've also enabled them to hear what it is that I have to add when it comes to this particular job opportunity or this particular role. So it's a bit of a switch in mindset, right? So that at that stage, once you have that winning mindset, you can take a step toward making sure you can understand what language that firm speaks. So similar to what was just mentioned, doing your research. If it requires you to go through proxy statements, of course, 10K, SEC, annual reports, or different webcasts, podcasts, white papers, publications, by all means, do that research. Because at that point, you can generate key takeaways that are stated and defined. Then you can generate your own key takeaways that lead to very distinct types of questions, especially if you're talking to a hiring manager or subject matter expert. That type of conversation goes beyond what's the culture like here, or what's the typical day like? What types of projects have you worked on in the last 6 months? Or you can have a very engaging conversation that goes far beyond those questions. And especially if you're thinking about a manager, director, vice president conversation, these individuals are most oftentimes setting the leadership vision and strategy and direction of the firm, or at least the business unit. So if you're coming in with that perspective, the insights, and really are enabling them to move their teams forward and be productive, it goes without saying what's going to come to their mind is, this is the type of person I need on my team right now. And so let's get them an interview. And then, of course, the last thing, we don't want it to be super transactional, but the last thing I'll say is building rapport, and then building toward what I call compliance, or at least, the ability to move forward in the process, right? So enabling the ability to build trust in a small amount of time, maybe 15, 20 minutes on a conversation. And then in the back half of that call, maybe last like 2 to 3 minutes, those positive outcomes. If we've done all those things right, we've done our research, done our homework, we have a running mindset, we came with perspective, there's no way that the person on the other end of that phone isn't going to want to see you win beyond that conversation. Even if it's 5 years from now, you can still reach out to that individual and see how you all can either work together, or who knows, maybe there's an opportunity to add value to their journey as well. That's a bit of a flip on this dynamic. How can you add value to a vice president in a firm that you want to work at? And that's the type of thinking, the type of questioning you should be asking yourself when going into these conversations, because at the end of the day, those are the individuals that rise to the top and are ultimately successful.
I appreciate all of your insights, and I also see a bunch of those posts on LinkedIn of I applied for 4,000 jobs and got 2 interviews. I also often see, not as often, but still, I see the messages from recruiters or HR people saying that I got 4,000 applications and all of them were terrible, which happens as well. And I was wondering, Kevin, what do you think companies need to do differently in the next few years to attract and retain young talent and not just easy applicants?
A lot. I think we talked about it earlier. I think it follows the same supply and demand economics that we've seen in a capitalist society for quite some time, right? So if it's a buyer's market, like it was a few years ago, and employers had to really start to look at their benefits, and what do we do as a culture, and how do we attract these individuals? But I think we overcomplicate when we keep saying, oh, there's multiple generations and they all want different things. I think at the end of the day, when we look at what's our common thread, and we're human first, right? So most humans agree that they always want to be listened to, valued, and heard, appreciated, and understood. They want to know that their basic needs are being met, and that starts to intrinsically motivate individuals to want to be a part of a team, something greater than themselves. Without that, I think then you get the individual contributors, right? You get the people on their own islands, acting what's in their own best interest rather than others. And I think the businesses that are able to build the collaboration around love and some of these emotions that we're so afraid to discuss in business is the real way to build an effective team. And that's what I think the younger generation is asking for. It's more than work. They've heard their parents come home and complain that they hate their job over and over again. So it's like, why would I want to subject myself to that mad science? That sounds like insanity, which it was. But how do we build these environments that celebrate our individuality while also celebrating that we have a life outside of work? While intrinsically motivating people to bring their best selves to work every single day. So I think that's the level of complexity that employers are facing today, and the ones that can do it the best will rise to the top and get the best talent that the market has to offer. The rest will kind of have to fight it out at the bottom.
Yeah, so it's all kind of mutual, right? The companies need to put their effort into attracting proper young talent, and at the same time the applicants need to put their effort in order to show them from the best perspective to the potential company. Thank you very much for this very insightful conversation about finding jobs. I hope it was useful to someone, and people will now actually stop clicking easy apply and go into some networking. So today at the studio I had Kevin Rustisi, Vice President and CEO of Bolter Industrial Contractors. Thank you so much for joining, Kevin.
Thank you. This was a ton of fun.
Brian Carroll, owner at Lane Recruiting. Thank you so much for the insights.
Thanks for having me.
And Justin Lewis, a tech entrepreneur and MBA career consultant. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you so much. Take care.
I'm Ksenia Kolar, sitting in for Evan Dawson. Thank you for listening to member-supported public radio.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.